There are soldiers, and then there are ghosts. In 1968, the U.S. Army in Vietnam had the most firepower in the history of the world. We had B-52 bombers that could flatten mountains. We had artillery that could drop a shell into a bucket from 10 miles away. We had tanks, sensors, and night vision. We built fire support bases, FSBs, on top of hills, fortresses designed to be impenetrable. We surrounded them with layers of barbed wire, minefields, and searchlights. We thought we were safe inside our circles of steel, but we weren't, because the North Vietnamese Army had an answer to our technology. They didn't have airplanes or tanks. They had men, special men. They called them Dac Cong. We called them Sappers, but most of the guys in the bunkers just called them ghosts. A Sapper wasn't your average NVA regular. He was the elite of the elite, handpicked for intelligence, physical endurance, and nerves of steel. Their training was legendary. We heard stories that they practiced crawling through fields of thorns until their skin was callous. They learned to hold their breath for minutes to avoid making a sound. They learned to disarm a claymore mine in pitch darkness using only their fingertips. But what terrified us the most was how they looked. When a Sapper went to work, he stripped away everything. No uniform, no heavy boots, no helmet. He wore only a loincloth or swim trunks. His entire body was coated in a mixture of grease, charcoal, and mud. He became a human shadow. The grease wasn't just for camouflage. It helped him slide through razor wire without getting snagged, and it masked his human scent from our guard dogs. He carried no food, no water. He carried only death. Strapped to his body were satchel charges, canvas bags filled with TNT, bamboo tubes filled with plastic explosives, Bangalore torpedoes, to blow up the wire, grenades, and maybe a folding stock AK-47 or a pistol. They were human bombs. The psychological impact of the Sapper was devastating. You could be sitting in your bunker at 2 a.m. The perimeter lights are on. The guards are watching. The claymores are armed. You feel safe. You don't know that 3 hours ago, while you were eating dinner, a squad of Sappers had already started crawling towards your wire. They moved inch by inch. Literally. A Sapper might take an hour to move 10 feet. They timed their movements with the wind. When the wind blew the grass, they moved. When the wind stopped, they froze. They merged with the earth. They were patient. They would lie motionless in the elephant grass for hours, letting mosquitoes bite them, letting snakes slither over them, never twitching a muscle, just watching you. They watched the guards smoke cigarettes. They memorized the shift changes. They mapped out the blind spots in the searchlights. They were untangling our defenses with the precision of a surgeon. For the American soldier, the night became a terrifying unknown. You found yourself staring into the darkness until your eyes played tricks on you. Was that a shadow moving? Or just a bush? We fired mad minutes, where everyone on the perimeter would open fire simultaneously into the dark for 60 seconds, just to kill anything that might be out there. We killed trees. We killed monkeys. But we rarely killed Sappers, because by the time the shooting started, they were usually already inside. The defense of a U.S. fire base was a masterpiece of lethal engineering. Picture a hill. Around the perimeter, we laid concertina wire, huge coils of razor-sharp wire stacked 3 rows deep and 4 rows high. It was a metal briar patch. Inside the wire, we planted tanglefoot, low wire strung ankle-high to trip anyone running. We placed trip flares. If you kicked the wire, a flare would pop, lighting up the area like daylight. And the killer, the M18 Claymore mine, a green plastic box filled with C4 and 700 steel ball bearings. When detonated, it fired a shotgun blast of steel that shredded everything in a 50-meter arc. To get through this, you had to be a magician. The Sappers were magicians. The infiltration usually began under the cover of a mortar barrage. The NVA would lob a few rounds into the base. Thump. Boom. It wasn't enough to do damage, but it was enough to make the Americans keep their heads down. The noise of the explosions covered the sound of the wire cutters. The lead Sapper, the point man, was the most skilled. He approached the outer wire on his stomach. He didn't cut the wire immediately. Cutting wire makes a distinct snip sound that travels in the night. Instead, he used bamboo poles to lift the wire up, creating a tiny tunnel underneath. Or he would find the connection points and untwist them silently with his greased fingers. If he had to cut, he would wait for a thunderclap, an artillery boom, or even the noise of a passing jet plane to mask the sound. He moved like a reptile. He felt for the tripwires with a thin blade of grass or a feather-light touch of his skin. When he found a trip flare, he didn't cut the wire, which might trigger it. He pinned the striker's safety lever, neutralizing it. When he found a claymore mine, he didn't avoid it. He turned it around. Imagine the horror of that. A sapper crawls up to your mine, the one facing him, and gently rotates it so it faces you in your bunker. He effectively turns your own weapon against you. The breach wasn't just a hole, it was a path. As the point man moved forward, he unspooled a white string or dropped bits of white cotton behind him. This was the breadcrumb trail. Behind him, the assault team waited. They were heavily laden with satchel charges and RPGs. They couldn't move as carefully. They needed a safe lane. The tension during this phase was unbearable. Inside the base, the guards were scanning the wire with starlight scopes, early night vision. The eerie green glow amplified the starlight. Sometimes, a guard would see something, a glint of sweaty skin, a shift in the wire. Halt! Who goes there? Or he would pop a handheld flare. Pop, hiss. The parachute flare would drift down, bathing the wire in wavering white light. Under the light, the sappers froze. They didn't panic. They didn't run. They lay perfectly flat, face down in the mud, looking like logs or mounds of dirt. The grease on their skin absorbed the light. The guard would look, see nothing but shadows, and relax. Just a rat, he'd think. But it wasn't a rat. It was a platoon of commandos, now 20 feet from his bunker, holding their breath. The infiltration could take 4, 5, 6 hours. By 03 a.m., the graveyard shift, the defenders were tired. Eyes were heavy. Attention drifted. That was the moment. The sappers were inside. They were lying in the drainage ditches between the bunkers. They were crouching behind the sandbag walls of the command post, TOC. They were underneath the trucks in the motor pool. They had bypassed the machine guns. They had bypassed the minefields. The enemy wasn't out there anymore. He was right here, and he was waiting for the signal. The signal usually came at 03 Huero or 04 a.m. It wasn't a radio call. It was an explosion. A sapper would slide a satchel charge under the command post, TOC, or the ammo dump. He would pull the fuse igniter, a small cord that hissed for 6 seconds. Psst. Then the world turned white. Boom! The shockwave would knock you out of your bunk. The sound was different from a mortar. It was sharper, louder, closer. It was the sound of something detonating inside the wire. Before the dust even settled, the base would erupt. Green tracers from the sappers would crisscross with red tracers from the confused Americans. Sappers in the wire! Sappers in the wire! The scream went out over the radio, but usually, the radios were already dead because the comms bunker was the first target. Pandemonium took over. Imagine waking up from a deep sleep to the sound of explosions and screaming. You are in your underwear. As the initial shock wore off, the battle turned into a series of vicious, close-quarters duels. The sappers weren't just running around anymore. They were hunting. They went for the bunkers. A sapper tactic was to stand on top of a bunker roof. He would wait for a GI to run out the door, then shoot him from above. Or he would dangle a grenade in front of the firing slit, drop it in, and roll away. We had to fight them with whatever we had. I remember a cook, a guy who usually just made scrambled eggs, fighting a sapper with a meat cleaver in the mess hall. I saw a mechanic beat a sapper to death with a wrench. It was primal. There were no tactics. It was kill or be killed in the mud. The most terrifying weapon they had was the satchel charge, a canvas bag filled with blocks of TNT and a friction fuse. If a sapper threw one into your bunker, you had maybe 3 seconds. I was in a bunker on the north perimeter. We were firing at the wire. Suddenly, a dark object flew through the door and landed on the floor. It was hissing. Time froze. I looked at it. My buddy looked at it. We didn't think. We dove. I went left. He went right, scrambling over the sandbags just as it went off. The concussion felt like being hit by a truck. My ears popped. The pressure wave turned the wooden beams of the bunker into splinters. If we had been inside, we would have been pink mist. But the sappers paid a heavy price. They were on a suicide mission, and they knew it. Once the American infantry organized, we started hunting them down. We formed sweep lines, moving shoulder to shoulder through the camp. Watch your fire! Watch your fire! We cornered them. A sapper trapped is a dangerous animal. They wouldn't surrender. They would pull the pin on a grenade and hold it to their chest, waiting for you to get close. Or they would charge you, screaming, trying to take you with them. I shot a sapper 3 times in the chest. He kept coming. He was so high on adrenaline, and maybe drugs we suspected, that his body refused to die. He fell at my feet, his hand still gripping the fuse of a bomb. I kicked it away just before it blew. By 05 Vuisag AM, the shooting started to die down. The explosions became sporadic. The sappers who hadn't been killed were trying to escape back through the wire. But we didn't let them go. We called in Spooky, the AC-47 gunship. The sky turned into a solid red beam as the miniguns chewed up the perimeter wire. The ghosts who had slipped in were now trapped in the killing zone. When the sun finally rose, the firebase looked like a smoking junkyard. Tents were burned to the ground. Jeeps were overturned. The big guns were twisted metal, and the bodies were everywhere. We started the grim task of policing the battlefield. We dragged the sapper bodies to a central collection point. That's when the shock set in. We looked at them. They were small, skinny. Some of them looked like teenagers. They wore almost nothing. A piece of cloth, a pouch for explosives, and that black grease covering every inch of skin. We counted them. 20, maybe 30. 30 men. 30 men had almost destroyed a battalion of 500 Americans. They had slipped through millions of dollars worth of sensors, mines, and wire. They had walked right past our guards. The psychological damage was worse than the physical damage. We rebuilt the bunkers. We restrung the wire. We got new guns. But we never got our sleep back. Every night after that, as the sun went down, the paranoia set in. You would sit in your bunker, staring at the wire, and you would think, are they out there? You knew that no matter how much wire you put up, no matter how many claymores you planted, if they wanted to get in, they could get in. You started hearing noises. A rat scratching on a sandbag sounded like a sapper cutting wire. A wind gust sounded like a footstep. We became jumpy, trigger happy. We shot at shadows. The sappers had achieved their goal. They hadn't overrun the base, but they had destroyed our sense of security. They taught us that in Vietnam, there was no front line. There was no rear area. There was no safe place. The war was everywhere. And the enemy could be anyone, anywhere, anytime, even a ghost in the wire. Thank you for listening to this episode of Beneath the Metal. The Sapper attacks were some of the most harrowing experiences for U.S. troops in Vietnam. If you want to support the channel and hear more untold stories, please subscribe and share. Sleep with one eye open.